Tonight, we begin with a development that Pentagon officials had feared, NATO allies had anticipated, and intelligence analysts had prepared for. A decision that unfolded not over months of deliberation, but in a matter of days. Days that rewrote the calculus of modern air warfare. Days that shattered assumptions Moscow had held since February 2022. Days that may have fundamentally altered the trajectory of this war. What the Biden administration did this week crossed a line that Vladimir Putin had hoped would hold, and when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, coordination, and devastating effectiveness. For 18 months now, there had been signals, not official announcements, not formal declarations, just signals that the United States was preparing something unprecedented. The Biden administration has been cautious, yes, but they have been strategic in their caution. Their moves have followed a certain logic, a predictability, almost a rhythm. But what set off alarm bells in Moscow this month was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Western military aid know the indicators. The sudden acceleration of pilot training programs, the quiet repositioning of maintenance crews, the diplomatic back channels going dark, the sudden absence of public statements, all of that went quiet. And whenever Washington goes quiet on military aid, it means something is about to get loud. Early Tuesday, satellite imagery detected what analysts described as advanced fourth-generation fighter aircraft on Ukrainian airfields, including tail markings that had not been observed in the theater in over 30 years. These are the kinds of assets that the West only deploys when they are signaling something very specific. A strategic commitment, a capability upgrade, or a fundamental shift in the rules of engagement. Observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Ukraine was changing its air posture. And when a nation at war shifts air posture without explanation, even by a single squadron, the Kremlin pays attention. The statement issued by the Kremlin tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after briefing described the F-16 delivery as provocative, escalatory, and perhaps most importantly, a direct challenge to Russian air superiority that Moscow had maintained since day one. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive we've seen in this entire conflict. Here's what we know. Within 72 hours of receiving the first operational F-16 seconds, Ukraine launched coordinated air operations. These weren't the defensive sorties we've seen before. These were offensive combat missions, weapons systems, that Ukraine only deploys when they are preparing to contest airspace Russia believed was theirs. Tonight, Ukrainian military command confirmed that F-16 seconds participated in strikes on Russian positions, including an S-400 air defense battery that had recently been repositioned for what analysts believe was protection of a critical logistics hub. Ukraine struck before Russia could establish integrated air defense coverage. They hit radar installations. They hit command and control nodes. They hit forward ammunition depots that were likely preparing to support a renewed offensive. In other words, Ukraine targeted Russia's ability to project air power. The electronic warfare systems that would have made Russian aircraft operational, this is what made Washington's coordinated announcement so significant. Russia's air dominance wasn't just symbolic, it was foundational. It represented the kind of advantage that could determine outcomes if left unchallenged. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't attack civilian infrastructure. They didn't target population centers. They hit military command systems. They hit the backbone of Russian air operations. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Western intelligence now believes that Putin's repeated warnings about F-16 seconds were designed to test the resolve of NATO after months of political uncertainty in Washington. Putin wanted to see whether the West would blink. But instead, the opposite happened. The Biden administration didn't delay. They accelerated delivery with a timeline so compressed, so coordinated, that even the Kremlin noticed. You don't get Moscow's attention easily, but today, Washington did. Defense analysts speaking with major outlets under anonymity described Russia's rhetorical shift as recalibration, a way to process an unexpected development. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and lethal. Their operations were not only successful, they were executed so precisely that multiple Russian aircraft were forced to withdraw from forward positions. That withdrawal matters because it shows Russia is adapting defensively. It shows that Ukraine is not merely surviving, they are contesting. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian F-16 pilots carried out suppression missions against Russian air defenses, forcing Moscow to reposition critical assets away from the front lines. Ground forces targeted ammunition storage facilities that had been identified by Western intelligence in the last 72 hours. Ukrainian drones operating in coordination with the F-16 seconds reportedly struck communication relays used by Russia to coordinate close air support. This wasn't just a symbolic first flight. This wasn't just a photo opportunity. This was integrated air warfare. This was combined arms coordination at a level Ukraine has never demonstrated before. And combined arms coordination is the one thing Russia has struggled to achieve since the invasion began. For every advance Russia has made, Ukraine has countered with something that complicates their operational planning. Remember, Putin thought the West would never provide advanced fighter aircraft. They thought European allies would fracture under economic pressure. They thought Washington would prioritize domestic politics over sustained military aid. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. The F-16 seconds are operational, European resolve has hardened, and the Biden administration just crossed the reddest of Putin's red lines. What makes this moment so consequential and so dangerous is that Russia's response happened at a time when Putin is under extraordinary internal pressure. Military hardliners want escalation. Economic advisors want de-escalation. Regional governors want resources for domestic priorities. And nationalist voices want visible victories. Putin is balancing these demands while managing a war that has lasted far longer than anyone in Moscow anticipated. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The Pentagon statement, now circulating through every major news organization, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Russia to dictate the terms of Western military aid. Officials said plainly that Moscow's threats were inconsistent with the rules-based international order. That is diplomatic language for, we're not intimidated and we're not backing down. You don't usually hear that tone from Washington unless something fundamental is at stake. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed his nation in a powerful, defiant speech tonight. He said, "Today our pilots fly aircraft that represent the strength of our allies and the courage of our people." He said, "Putin told us this day would never come. Today, it came." And he said, "We are not just defending Ukraine. We are defending the principle that borders cannot be changed by force." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's response wasn't isolated. Along with their official condemnation, Russian strategic bombers also conducted flights near NATO airspace. Russian naval vessels repositioned in the Black Sea. And Russian cyber units increased probing attacks targeting Western infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 48-hour window. When Moscow moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Military analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Russia is preparing an intensified air campaign before Ukraine's F-16 fleet reaches full operational capacity. Another is that Putin is attempting to fracture Western unity through escalatory signals. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia is attempting to establish new red lines before Ukraine can fully exploit its new capabilities. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for full squadron strength. They didn't hesitate for political approval. They didn't delay for optimal conditions. They flew combat missions within days of delivery. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Russia wants to see whether the West will sustain this level of support through the next phase. Ukraine wants to show that Western weapons in Ukrainian hands produce results. NATO wants to prevent escalation beyond conventional boundaries. And Washington wants to prevent Putin from believing he can outlast democratic patience. Tonight, we've heard from defense officials who are now monitoring Russian Air Force repositioning. They say Russian aircraft have pulled back from several forward operating locations. They say command and control disruptions have created temporary gaps in Russian air coverage. And they say Putin's decision to threaten consequences is likely part of an information campaign intended to shape Western public opinion. But Ukraine is not deterred. In fact, Ukraine is emboldened. Their response today, swift, coordinated, and effective, sent a message to Russia that the rules of this war have changed. And it sent a message to the world that Western military aid is achieving its intended purpose. As the coming weeks unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Moscow hoped to achieve with their warnings. But what we do know is that the Biden administration's decision was timely. It reinforced Ukrainian capabilities at a critical moment. It demonstrated sustained Western commitment, and it complicated Russian operational planning in ways that will take months to adjust. What happens next will depend on what Putin does in the next several weeks. If Russia de-escalates, this moment will be remembered as a turning point. If Russia escalates, Ukraine and NATO have already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in 30 months, Russia appears to be on the defensive in the air domain. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Moscow is quiet, it means they are calculating, it means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Russia learned something they should have learned long ago. Red lines mean nothing if you're not prepared to enforce them. Western unity bends but does not break. And Ukraine will fight with whatever tools they are given. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Putin's air superiority assumption has been shattered. Biden's calculated risk has paid immediate dividends. And the skies over Ukraine are no longer uncontested. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.